Hey y'all, welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Colton here with Brandon, as well as Darcy from WCC, winner of the EU regional at Rumble. We reached out to him a couple weeks ago and asked him to come on this Rumble recap show, and he graciously agreed to do so. So thank you, Darcy, for being here. Super awesome to have you. We will
It's
get
okay.
to talking about Rumble in just a moment. First, some news we have to run down real quick. First things first, Worlds will not be in Japan this year. Worlds will be in Los Angeles. That will take place early 2023. Realistically, this is probably because of COVID restrictions in Japan, which are still more strict than they are in the US. So, Worlds will be in LA this year. Plan accordingly. Also, a new set of events has been announced as well. The Weiss Schwarz Title Cup has been announced for English stores. For each new set going forward, it looks like we will be having title cups in stores with the winners receiving a special PR that isn't technically a card, it's just like an art piece with participants receiving an actual like playable PR as well. That's the way that it is for the Quintuplets 2 title cup, which is the first one. Again, looks like this is happening for every set release post Quints 2. So that's happening. We also have some updated results. We have top 8 from the first BCS regional in Texas from last weekend. Top 8 featured 3 8 standby Mushoku Tenseis, 2 Hololives, one of which was Watame Marine, the other was Kanata Marine. The main Danmachi list, Salvage Standby Ruby, and then that Tokyo Revengers Dual Laners list, which I am sure we are going to talk about at some point. Top 4, MTI goes 1-2, followed by Hololive and Danmachi. So that's the only regional that's happened so far. We will have the Atlanta regional next week on September 3rd, as well as the Taiwan regional, although there are definitely some things going on with the Taiwan regional in regards to who can and cannot get in. So we will cross that bridge when we get there. But in any case, that's it for the news and stuff. Let's get into talking about Rumble. Darcy, thank you for being here. It's awesome having you. Let's pass it off to you.
Yeah, okay. So I played in AO and EU. Um, I was going to play an NA if I didn't top either of the two, and fortunately I did. So I decided to go to sleep at 3 a.m. rather than keep playing.
Good life choice.
But yeah, so AO, I decided to play Love Live Sunshine because one, I knew Mushoku was really popular in Australia, so I thought that's a good matchup I could take advantage of. And it's kind of like a last hurrah because I didn't get to play the deck at Springfest, and starting to get power crept, and it's my favorite deck. So last tournament, I'm going to use it in for the foreseeable future. And I was 4-1 after round 5, and then I lost 2 in a row, so I didn't quite make it there, but that's okay with me because I soldiered on for EU. I played Kanata Marine. I chose this deck because this and Mushoku I thought were the two strongest decks, and it was kind of you choose one and there's no real right or wrong answer. I figured Danmachi was new, it's going to be popular. I don't really want to play maybe Mushoku if that's the case. It's not like it's a horrible matchup, but it's definitely not preferred. So I took Kanata. And so round by round, round 1, I got to verse a Rushia deck, and I won that one pretty comfortably. Round 2, I versed the Mushoku. Now Mushoku is an interesting matchup because, in my opinion, it's not quite clear which is the favorited deck. They're both very strong. Probably the early game favors Mushoku a lot, but then the mid game kind of comes back to Kanata, and then anyone could win at the end. But I won this one, and then round 3, I got to verse June, my first time playing against him. This is why I like online events so much, because I get to play against people from all around the world, and June's got a name for himself, so this is a rare opportunity. But he was playing Ruby. He was playing a door choice build with just like a choice door, and he was playing like a good stuff deck, but all the good stuff was like modern, so it wasn't good stuff. It was like great stuff. But yeah, I took that one down. It was a close game. My board kept on getting answered, but Marine is really broken. And then I versed Tokyo Revengers. I versed Christian from Strictly Broken. This is a pretty good matchup for Kanata actually, because they can force themselves to level 3 so they don't get locked and then just blown out. And also having access to a stock swap is really, really strong. So it's a really good matchup for Kanata Marine. The Towa back row is also great because they don't have many resources. Taking away their back row leaves them with even less. So I won that one. Round 5, I had to verse Danmachi. This is a pretty good matchup for me. However, I think once I got to level 2, I didn't cancel and just died, which is fine. That's Weiss Schwarz. That definitely works both ways. So it's okay losing that game there. Round 6, I got to verse Taya. So this is another cool opportunity. Verse someone all the way from Slovenia with their small population. And so she was on Bang Dream. It was Choice Door with the Cocochino top end. That was a really close game, but in the end, I was able to close it out by healing and looping Kanatas quite a lot. And then round 7, I got to verse Mushoku again. And this one, I finally got to make good use of the Kanata from the booster set that I put in the deck. On my final turn, I was able to play it down multiple times, looping it to stop him from using a rest counter. And then I was able to safely Marine and seal the win. And then fast forward to top 8, I had to play against Mushoku in top 8, and this was my teammate Mark, my friend from Sydney as well. So he's the best player in Australia. He is so good. And it was a close one. It could have been anyone's game. And at the end, I needed a soul trigger to win, and I triggered stock soul and the 5-star. It was an incredibly close game. Anyone could have won it. The luck favored in my side at the end, and I was able to take it down. But I felt really confident that if I didn't win, I knew that he was going to win the tournament. So it sucks to verse him in the first round, but the team is going to do well either way. In top 4, I had to verse Mushoku, who was my round 7 opponent of Swiss. This was also a pretty quick game. So one of the advantages of playing Kanata Marine is that it's able to field lots of cards really quickly and early, and tri-field with little punishment because you're able to get those cards back. So I was able to do that because he couldn't use the stock kicker because he had to play it as an attacker. So I was able to play a really fast game, which benefits me, and I won that one. And then the grand finals, I got to verse Danmachi. This is my 3rd time in the finals and my 1st time winning it, so I was very, very happy. It was, again, like a fast game, like in terms of tempo. I was able to tri-field really early, and he was tri-fielding as well, and then he was able to get less resources than I could, and I was just able to seal things out with my trustworthy Marine. And so I ended up winning Pro EU. I was very, very happy. I was very emotional. There were lots of tears shed that evening. And I'm just still like on top of the world, it feels like.
I'd argue that's because you are.
Yeah, literally. On top of the world
I'm-
from the bottom of the world.
Yep, that's right.
But yeah, congratulations, first of all. Obviously, congratulations are in order. So you said coming in that you thought Kanata Marine kind of stacked up with MTI as like number 1, number 2 in the meta. Do you think that Kanata Marine's the best deck in the meta right now?
I think in this very temporary period, we're in a meta between we have Danmachi, but we don't have Quints. I'm okay with saying it might be slightly better than Danmachi, than Mushoku, sorry, because it doesn't have to deal with Danmachi that badly. And so I think that in like this weird kind of in between metas, that maybe Kanata is the best deck. But I think if you're going to play against a deck that's not Danmachi and it's not Hololive, that Mushoku is the deck that you wanted to be using. It's the deck that I would want to verse all the lesser decks with. Yeah, I feel like it's the safest, most consistent, and its strategy is just too strong for some of the weaker decks in the meta. So either option is really okay, in my opinion.
As we mentioned earlier, we have the top 8 results from Texas. 3-8 standby Mushoku Tenseis in top 8. The Atlanta regional event, the next regional event will have quintuplets added. How do you think the existence of quintuplets affects the presence of MTI in the meta? Because a lot of people, they want to play the strongest standby deck. Some people they're just standby players. They play whatever the strongest standby deck happens to be. They went from Data Live to Mushoku Tensei, and a lot of them may jump from MTI to quintuplets. What do you think?
I think it's interesting. I don't think anything's going to change with Mushoku. I think that it got 3 tops out of top 8 in Texas, and I kind of expect it to do, more or less the same across all regionals, somewhere between like maybe 2 and 4, something like that. Any of those, because they're just both such strong decks, and they do different things, and they play differently, even though they're both 8 standby. So Quint is like a 1k1 deck disguised in a 8 standby deck, whereas Mushoku is more traditional. It's 8 standby. It's like it can play slowly if it wants to. It can play really defensively. And so I think there are merits to both of those. And I think we might see some regional stuff here. So I think it's possible that we see Quints or Mushoku do better in maybe Europe than compared to North America or something like that, because they're both even in strength, in my opinion. And so it will come down to the player's play style. So the 8 standby players will ride with Mushoku, but the 1k1 players might start riding with quintuplets.
So I don't think we want to get too far into meta conversation without wrapping up talking about how we did at Rumble specifically. So Brandon, you played in just the AO event. You brought Mushoku Tensei. How did it go?
I definitely tried to play Mushoku Tensei as a rush deck. That does not work, specifically the 8 standby build. So I bottomed out pretty quickly, but because that was the only event I played in, I played long enough that my record overall doesn't pretty even. I definitely got in my own head a little bit and added more pieces to the deck than it needed, not relying on the strength of the deck itself. My overall record was 3-4, but you, on the other hand, played in both AO and NA.
Yeah, I was on Fate, Grand Order, Camelot. I was initially going to play Salvage Choice, but then decided to swap out the choice triggers for Standby. I went 1-3 in AO, mostly because I think I opened 4 or more climaxes in every one of those games. So it doesn't really matter what you're playing. Like that's a lot of CXs. You eat a ton of damage early, and it's really hard to recover. I played into the Blake top end in Ruby in round 1, dies to Mocha because again, no CXs. I played Kanata Marine in round 2, and I won that one. I lost to 8 standby Mushoku Tensei in round 3, and then to Bunny Girl in round 4. And finally said, screw this, I'm dropping because I want to sleep before I play NA tomorrow. So AO did not go well. I went to bed rather upset because I didn't know how to fix it. I literally de-sleeved and re-sleeved because I'm like, I don't know if the sleeves are messing me up. I don't know what's happening. So I de-sleeved the whole deck and swapped them into new sleeves. And apparently that made the difference because the next day I went X2. I opened with a win against Sora, which is an annoying matchup, but not one that's unbeatable. Like the challenge with Nextsoul right now is just there's so much that gets rid of it. But the ability to have additional burns in, more or less all of your lanes, like eventually that just carried me, even though he was able to loop his Sora a couple of times. So I won that one. I lost to Kronos in round 2. He was on Kanata Marine, and then I didn't lose to Kanata Marine anymore the rest of the way. I played into it again in round 3. The dude put down, I think, 6 Kanatas at one, like he over the course of the game, like 6 times he was able to get another Kanata out. I Adachi'd a couple of them into stock, but it's fake removal when you're playing Kanata because it just gets its stuff from waiting room. So as soon as it pays those out, it's back on the board basically. So that was annoying, but again, like Grand Order pushes damage, it burns, its top end is pretty explosive. So when you lean into that, and Kanata Marine doesn't have like a ton of compression tools, you can win board on offense, force them to run it back and get their Kanatas back on board again and again and again. And eventually they're going to run out of just enough steam. And, Grand Order, because it has enough speed of its own, it can compress down so that Marine doesn't just auto kill you from 3-0 necessarily. That's what happened in that game. Felt pretty good about it. I then played the Mirror, and that game that game was an absolute disaster. I went to 2 on like turn 2 and just never had enough stock because I just ate a ton of damage. Just, it is what it is. I played 8 Choice Hololive in round 5, and the other player basically just never got his pieces together. I pushed him pretty hard, and he just ate a ton of damage. Round 6, I was 3-2 at that point. I played into SDS Negsol, or at least I would have if the player didn't not show up. I think he just forgot to drop in the drop chat, so I got a free dub against SDS. And then in the final round, I had to play into Don Machi for the first time, and Don Machi kind of gets bullied on board by anything that can consistently remove it. So it's really hard, I think, for Don Machi to just keep getting its pieces down so it can continue to just be big all the time. Like, it's banking on playing into standby stuff that wants so much to get its stuff down for free and then can't recur its entire board. But if it's playing into something that recurs its board easily or can get over it defensively, then Don Machi kind of folds, and that's what happened here. I closed like a turn early just because I was able to win board the entire game. So once his level 1 combo was done resolving, I don't think I lost board the rest of the game. So I missed top cut. I mean, that's what happens when you start 2-2. Overall, really, really happy with it. Grand Order does not have a single nightmare matchup. I think that's the biggest thing with Grand Order, is that it's a great Swiss deck because there's nothing that just immediately kills it. It's sort of like Sunshine in that way, because its whole thing is that, it just does a bunch of burn damage, but you can play around tap counter, you can win board on offense and defense. The Adachi actually destroys standby boards because it can crash into one and then just get rid of the other by ditching the level 0 bonder. So Grand Order answers a lot of things. It has a lot of ways to play aggressively and not necessarily reactively against the stuff that's good in the meta right now. So I like it. I think Grand Order is really solid. I'm continuing to tweak ratios and stuff, but this is the deck I'm going to take to regionals. I think that it has a chance to perform really well as long as you open a playable hand. So that's how we did. Let's dive into the data. This is easily one of the best things that we do on this channel, is just go headfirst into a spreadsheet full of numbers after a weekend full of cards. Hey y'all, Future Colton here with a couple of quick notes about what you're seeing on screen right now. Some of this requires a little bit of explanation as to how this all came together. First of all, this data was basically entirely collected by Brandon, so thank you so much to him for putting all the work in to get this data together. He was the one tracking people down and trying to get their deck lists. So thanks again to him for making this happen. So as for the numbers themselves, the actual math part, we made a couple of decisions about how we were going to sort this data. We sorted it all by triggers. So whatever triggers people were playing in their decks, that is how we split up every line of data in the finished spreadsheet, which we have linked in the description. You can check out the whole thing there. It's even more comprehensive than this. There's a ton of stuff there. Definitely worth checking out. But there were some things in here that we decided to present in a particular way. Most notably, what we chose to do with decks that were similar but not exactly the same. In the data set, in the spreadsheet, they will be separated out. But for the purposes of this video, we wanted to kind of show what archetypes we're doing overall during Rumble. So specifically with the Hololive stuff, the X Marine that you see on that 4th line, that is basically any level 1 plus in combo. It was mostly choice but there was also some pants and I believe one bar in there as well. The decks were functionally very similar, but they just ran different triggers, and it made sense to combine them all. Their results were very similar, so we combined all those. The Bang Dream Choo-Choo line is for each deck that played the Choo-Choo package in Bang Dream. Pretty self-explanatory. They all played pants, but they had different top ends. A couple different things were going on there. But primarily their engine was centered around the Choo-Choo package, so we made sure that they were all represented together because, again, kind of a similar archetype. Same with the Fate Grand Order Salvage Saber stuff. There were a few different ways you could play it with triggers that we saw throughout the weekend. This is consolidating those things into the Salvage Level 1 with the Saber / Lion King early play package with the burns. And these all also played the Salvage Level 3 top end, which is on the same climax as the Level 1 Salvage combo. Everything above the white line is just the top 10 in terms of representation, sorted by representation. Everything below the white line is stuff that wasn't in the top 10 for representation, but was otherwise very interesting. Either had a high conversion rate or a noticeable win-loss percentage, or was just very relevant for some particular reason. We did split up a lot of Ruby stuff you see down here at the bottom. There's a reason that all isn't together, and it's because those decks are very different from each other, despite having kind of similar trigger lineups. But they also performed very, very differently. Like, the Choice Level 1 into the 2 standby combos, both the Pyrrha and the Ruby, performed very differently from just the Choice standby list that had a couple more players. So it was worthwhile for our purposes to keep them separate just because those results were very different from one another, and those decks are also very different despite running the same number of Choice and standby CXs for the most part. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of context for what is going on here. Sorry to interrupt. Let's get back to our conversation with me, Darcy, and Brandon. There are 4 numbers that we immediately look at when the data is all said and done. One of those things is just representation rate, like what percentage of the meta was a set or a deck. The next one is win percentage, like what decks are winning most of their games. X2 percentage, what percentage of a deck's representatives went X2. And, of course, what percentage of them went top 8. Because X2 is kind of like the universally accepted bubble for top cut in most tournaments. So knowing which decks went X2 most often, most consistently, is a useful metric. Let's look at win percentage first. All of these are, goofed up by small sample sizes, right? This does not mean that SDS is suddenly meta. However, it does mean, I think, that SDS still has its fair share of matchups that can't deal with its Neg Soul and its anti-auto damage. Same kind of goes for Data Live. Only one player on Dow. They went 4-3. There's just not a whole lot you could take away from that. Bang Dream wins about 57% of its games. 2 of its 11 players go X2 and 1 makes top 8. Bang Dream is still really solid.
So Bang Dream is in an interesting spot because I think that it's going to get hurt a lot when Quince, as soon as it comes out, definitely going to hurt Bang Dream. The Choo-Choo will die to these really good standby cards. So it's going to, it's good that Bang Dream can kind of, it's a bit morbid, but it top while it can, to be honest. It's still really good at the moment. Choo-Choo's really strong. So seeing it get a high win percentage is not the most surprising thing.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing, right? Like, this is, as much as this data is super helpful and super useful, we know quintuplets changes everything. We know quintuplets changes the landscape considerably. So a big question that unfortunately this data can't really answer for us is how well do these decks respond to 8 standby quintuplets specifically? Another deck that will have to deal with that is, of course, Mushoku Tensei. Identical winning percentage to Bang Dream. Had more representation than Bang Dream by a long way. Had a higher X2 and a higher top 8 percentage as well, which this is one of those things that's interesting. This is why I think winning percentage in terms of individual games is such an important metric, because it had an identical win rate to Bang Dream, but it had far more top 8s and X2 finishes. Some of that comes down to, just the numbers or whatever. But some of that also might have to do with matchups, right? Because in order to get into top 8, you usually need to have a higher opponent's winning percentage. MTI might have just had the privilege of playing into better players and getting wins because it's good. Or you could interpret this in a way that says that Bang Dream won a lot of games against decks that weren't very good. So there are a lot of ways to interpret this. That's why we try to look at all the numbers kind of in conjunction. But Mushoku Tensei, one of the most represented decks, consistent list. You know what you're getting into when you see someone open MTI. The big question is, how does Quince affect it? Is Quince going to beat MTI in the head-to-head matchups? Is Quince going to be popular enough that it's going to push MTI kind of out of its top tier spot? What do you guys think?
I think that MTI has. I think putting it next to each other, you have them on a very similar level. They do different things slightly, but they are both relatively consistent in themselves. MTI can kind of push out standbys with its ability to twin drive. Quince has the ability to potentially trigger additionally using the level 3 climax combo. So you have both of these decks trying to push out standby more often to try to keep their boards more consistently, as well as having the defensive tools to prolong the game as needed. So I think they both very much take on a similar role. So when I look at this, I see them more as a combined meta share as opposed to individualized.
I think it's really easy to just look at the two early combos that the decks have. So Mushoku has this 1-1 that's essentially an 8-5, which is really strong, except it doesn't have hand claw, so it'll lose to Quince 2-2, which it gets outstanding at level 1. But kind of, when you just look at it like that, it looks like, yeah, this is going to be a great matchup for Quince. But kind of like the further the game progresses and the more variance and triggering standby happens, it kind of can be anyone's game. So it's really hard to say what the Mushoku versus Quince matchup is going to be like, because if you're an English-only player, we just haven't experienced it yet.
Yeah, 8 standby versus 8 standby matchups are they're three things, right? One, they're incredibly grueling. They're so slow and grindy oftentimes, especially because none of your CX push damage. Secondly, they're very skill intensive because the interactions between individual cards, like there are one-ofs that people will drop in their 8 standby decks to try to help deal with 8 standby mirrors in particular. But the third thing is, like you said, so much of it comes down to just triggering. And both of these decks have ways to get more triggers. MTI has its combo. Quintuplets has its 12 standby CX that it drops. I think this matchup does lean quintuplets just because Quince can clear board, I think, more easily than Mushoku Tensei, strictly because Mushoku does not recur its board as easily. Like, the Galanes don't just immediately come back when they die, unlike the 2/2s for quintuplets. So I think that's like a massive point of advantage for quintuplets. But you're right. Like, if Tensei just triggers a bunch, if it triggers 3 times off its combo, and it has multiple Galanes down, and it also has, if it can get its back row down, if it can use that 1-1 combo over the course of the game, then yeah, like, it becomes a whole lot bigger and a whole lot harder to deal with. Quintuplets gets big on offense, but it's not going to clear the 15, 16,000 power threshold in every lane all the time. So if Tensei hits its triggers, then it can defend its board. But a lot of this matchup is going to come down to whoever gets their triggers and which method of creating more standby triggers is going to be more consistent. I don't think this is a luck question. I think it's which method of hitting more standby triggers is going to do better in the most games. Let's look at representation on the whole and kind of sort by that. When you do that, obviously MTI is in the top 3, but running away with representation at 30% of decks, and it definitely felt like it was higher than that, given the amount of times I played into Hololive that weekend. It's a good set, and it has multiple playable decks. Kanata Marine about half of this, so Kanata Marine on its own showing up almost as much as the next most popular set. Darcy, we already kind of talked about whether or not Kanata Marine is top tier. if it's the best deck in the meta. We didn't, however, see as much Corne Rushia. Rushia felt like it was really powerful, like it really had its moment during the Springfest season. It was really popular. But over the summer, it feels like Kanata Marina has overtaken it. Why do you think that is? And do you think Rushia is particularly relevant going forward? It did get a top and 3x2s.
Yeah, so I do think Russia is still relevant. I think that the people who play Russia will ride and die with Russia, I think. It is a really, really strong combo. It is really hard to remove from the board. It's like over 15k and has hand on core. There's not a lot of decks that can kind of deal with that. Russia's biggest issue is itself. So it can quite often just die to itself. And I think that's kind of why we didn't see it do so well. I think that only one top, which by the way was my friend Marussia. Thank you for topping with Marussia, and for lending me the cards for my deck. But I think that we will see more tournaments where Russia tops a lot, and then we'll see some tournaments where it just doesn't top at all. It's just the deck is biggest weakness is seriously just actually being able to play the game sometimes.
It doesn't have the closing top end that you expect in a modern deck. Like, its closing top end is, you don't have any climaxes in your deck. And I'm going to swing for 3 and 4, and that's just going to stick and win the game. But if you get a cancel or 2, then Rushia doesn't really have any other way to push damage. And I think that's its primary weakness at this point in time. Brandon, Hololive is everywhere. We play into it all the time at locals. We play into it in every tournament that we go to. What do you think the future of Hololive looks like in a quintuplets meta? What do you think gets played, and do you think it works?
Well, I still think it's going to be the Kanata Marine is still going to be the most popular build going forward, especially with after the end of this next month, where with the new support coming out. I think that having some of those new cards also help with some of that consistency to be able to keep this in the position where it is as kind of like the forerunner for Hololive. Hololive is such a great massive proportion of the field right now, and I don't think that's going to change, especially with its support coming into full usage here within another month. So I expect this ratio of almost a third of the field to be relatively consistent going forward. Obviously, like local areas and regional areas are going to be, I think, more impacted by some of that, but I definitely think that we're going to be seeing a lot of Hololive for quite a long time.
On the subject of Hololive, obviously there is a lot of stuff that works in Hololive, right? You talked about how Sora, like, it's getting a little bit more support with Hololive Productions. Like, Sora's going to be even more playable. It's already quite good. We already, we have the memory package with Choice Salvage. At the very least, it's popular. So, like, there's a lot of different Hololive running around. There's also a Pants Standby. It runs the Botan level 1, which is something we talked about on 5 Cards, 5 Minutes, and it plays into the Standby Nene combo at the top that has all of the memory condition stuff, but also reveals the top card and burns 3 on attack if it's level 1 or higher for free. It was only played by one person, and that one person got top 8. They finished 3rd. Is this the future of Hololive, guys? Is this where we're going? Botan Nene? Is that what's about to happen? Are we about to have a revolution? Because this deck is actually solid. Like, the pieces in this are really good. I'm a fan of the Botan. I think the Botan's pretty cool. I don't love that it's on reverse, but like, it actually gets huge, and I love Search 2. Search 2 is really good. And you search out for standby targets the whole 9 yards. Like, it's solid all the way around. What do you guys think of this?
I think memory is an interesting condition. Playing into the memory, I think, is helpful for some decks. I think that this deck was able to pull it off. I don't like the top end as inconsistent as it could be.
Oh, you see, that's where we disagree, because I love this top end. I always support like rogue deck builders who just kind of do their own thing. I'll be done talking about this, but I love stuff that's rogue and out there, and this is 100% that. So, I am drawn to it just because it's one of those statistical outlier kind of things. We have to talk about Danmachi next. I imagine. Danmachi's second most represented in Rumble. It's, it's pretty solid, clearly. Like 9 X2s, 3 top 8s. Only won about 51% of its games, though. And that's a number that, like, I noticed that number. Like, that's not a red flag number, but it's a yellow flag number. Can Danmachi hang in a Quince meta? Obviously, its whole thing is that it removes board, like it gets over and wins that way. But like against a deck that can recur its board as easily as quintuplets can, is that going to matter for Danmachi?
I think that it won't be that bad for Danmachi. I think that I'd be honestly a bit surprised if this representation number is kept up for Danmachi, but I don't think its place in the meta has dropped any far lower than it possibly can. I think that's really good at the moment, and I think it will continue being good with Quints. I think where the deck will struggle is against the 1k1 deck. So that's where the massive Hololive representation comes into play. I think that it will struggle to play against those decks a lot because it just has to play normal Weiss Schwarz. Its special thing that it's doing is just not that effective versus it. So I think that we'll still see lots of Danmachi top. It's just if it runs into too many Hololive, that might be a bad sign for it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that that's probably what's gatekeeping Danmachi more is Hololive itself. I mean, we did get a top with Texas with it, so it's still there, it's still prevalent, it's still making its way into top 8, so...
I think this is going to be a popular one for people who are just very over the standby revolution, who are just like, no, I don't want to deal with this anymore. My thing is free and it swings at 15 and it beats over your thing that you cheated on board. And also because like Danmachi's a pretty popular, like it's a popular thing. It's a popular franchise. Popular franchises never completely go away, even when they are not relevant in the meta. Like if it's well liked, it will never completely fade.
You say that, Colton.
I mean, you're right. Let's move on and talk about a couple of those things that did completely fade. We'll circle back to Tokyo Revengers. We'll get to you. 1 Dao, no Kaguya, 3 Sunshine, 3 Fate, 3 Sword Art. The guard has changed. Like, if there was any question that that there was a changing of the guard at hand, that question has been answered. A lot of the stuff that like was the foundational building blocks of old metas is now just not played at all. Kaguya and Dal in particular just got absolutely nuked by their bans. Like, no one is going to disagree that those aren't getting played because, in large part, they got banned to absolute Tartarus. Just not playable at this point, those two sets, really. Not at a high level. You have to manufacture something to make those decks work. Like, 8-choice Dal is pretty solid. Kaguya desperately needs its level 0 game, and it just doesn't get to play it anymore. So until new sets are released for Dal and Kaguya, those are just not going to see a ton of play, and certainly not going to get the tops and the wins that we're accustomed to with those sets. Is there anything here that surprises you about like what just did not get played at Rumble? Because I was surprised at how little Kaguya, at the fact that Kaguya literally saw no representation at all.
I'm a little bit surprised about Sword Art Online. So we know that Europe in particular really, really loved Sword Art Online back in the day. And then it had incredibly low representation, even with getting a Alicization Set 2 booster, which I think most people in the community agree is not a horrible pick. It's a pretty decent deck. The 6-gate, 2-stock soul, double Kirito combo into your choice of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Kirito finisher or a Xenon finisher. I'm a bit surprised that SAO was kind of such a low rep, even with getting second place at the previous NA Bro.
I definitely think that it was really interesting to see how this one in particular didn't have a lot of the even just smaller numbers of some of those different sets. Like that they had, for the most part, relatively couple just main groups of decks as opposed to a bunch of small representation of a lot of decks. For me, I think I attribute that a little bit to some of the more recent pricings of some of the new releases.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it definitely helps when, you can build a meta Hololive deck for like what, $100? You can bring something like card for card that can get a top at a regional level event.
Well, like for example, Chairman mentioned in his video attached with like Trusses Collectibles. Check them out; they're pretty awesome too. That his deck was about $20 that he brought for Tokyo Revengers.
Hmm.
That sounds like a good segue to me.
Nice job. Nice job. Yeah, no, let's talk about Tokyo Revengers. It had, for its part, a pretty solid weekend. It's a weird deck. There have been multiple profiles on the topic. Darcy, you know a thing or two about this deck. What hath you wrought?
You profiled on your channel Tokyo Revengers deck.
Yeah, this is kind of your fault.
Okay, yeah. Oh, I see.
The existence of this deck on like a mainstream level, like you can kind of trace it back to you to a certain extent. So I blame you.
Thank you.
If Magic is going to become Weiss, Weiss just needs to become Magic, right? Is that what happens?
Am I magic?
It kind of feels like Magic. It feels like a combo deck, is what it feels like.
Yeah, this deck is like super awesome to play. It's like a really, really fresh take on a Weiss Schwarz deck. It plays so differently. It reminds me of actually it reminds me of a little bit like Superstars, if you ever played Japanese format, where it just kills you from like anywhere in level 2. It is just an absurdly strong top end deck, and it has this really unique mechanic which we've seen in multiple sets, and then no set has been able to take advantage of it until now, which is dual laning. And you just play 2 cards and they get an incredible effect for the sacrifice of only being able to attack 2 times, which is just really, really cool to see in Weiss Schwarz. Like we never get to see decks like this, and it is really strong, and it's a sleeper pick. Not many people knew about the deck going into the tournament. That's partly why I released a video, because I didn't think it was kind of fair for so many people to not know about it. So I just wanted to kind of spread the word a little bit, get it out there, make sure people read up on some of their cards. Because if you knew Tokyo Revengers was out and then didn't dive too deep into it, you would just assume people would play 8 standby or 8 choice or something like that. So
Yeah.
This is by far the most unique deck we have in Weiss Schwarz at the moment, and it's really, really good. As we can see, it had like a 33% conversion rate, which is just really, really good.
Yeah, and we didn't talk about this in the in our like meta overview video. It only had a half a dozen players, but 3 of them went X2 and 2 of them made top 8 on the dual laners list. Do you think there's a future for Tokyo Revengers dual laners, or do you think that this is just a flash in the pan that's going to go away?
I think it's a little bit of both, because it is a very, very strong deck. There's no doubt about that. It does have its weaknesses. At times it can be really fragile, but absolutely it is strong, especially at this given moment. One of its weaknesses is things that are just can kill you from level 2. So when Quince is introduced into the meta, I feel like it might take a step back, because obviously it's a standby deck. You don't need to worry about your field ever dying, so you can just stand by your finishers and then just go for it when you're at level 2. It kind of like applies a lot of pressure to them. They will have to do their kill turns like earlier than maybe they wanted, and maybe that means they have less resources. And it has a really bad matchup into Kanata, which has picked up a significant amount of popularity over Bro Weekend and going forward probably. So it's absolutely a strong deck. It's one of the top decks in the meta right now. But there are decks that can counter it that are out that are also really, really good just by themselves. So it's hard to say where the trend will go, but I do think it's going to top again.
And the rest of Tokyo Revengers just not doing well at all. Just honestly a really awful win rate for anything that wasn't dual laners in Tokyo Revengers. How does it play into quintuplets specifically? Because Quince is going to have, like that potentially like 15 to 20% meta share. Like you're going to run into it almost every tournament.
Yeah, so Quince is interesting because Quince's biggest weakness compared to maybe the other strong 8 standby deck in Mushoku is that it's much harder for it actually to get its pluses early on. So it's not great at level 0 in terms of how many lanes it can attack in, and then it doesn't have a plussing combo. So it kind of naturally had to clock draw and brainstorm early on a little bit more than some of the other decks had to. But because the dual lane decks peak at 7k power, quintuplets can like really take its time. And then because it doesn't have to use as much of its resources, and they're likely in a winning board, that they can just stand by out their cards and hopefully try and kill from level 2 using their finisher. So it is an interesting one, and because Tokyo Revengers is so new, I can't say with 100% certainty that it's good for quints, but it really is looking a little bit scary for Tokyo Revengers, in my opinion.
Slime only had 10 players, but 3 of them go X2, 2 of them get top 8. So quietly a really solid representation rate. We are seeing with Slime the same kind of thing that we see with a lot of sets, right? Kind of in the life cycle of a set. You have like the early adopters are the people who, they play it out of the box and they say, oh, this is actually pretty good. This is actually pretty good. And then some people start to listen to them, and then it kind of hits the pinnacle of its representation where a lot of people are playing it. But because a lot of people are playing it, that usually tanks its winning percentage, and like its top rate goes down and things like that. And then as that kind of coalesces and like maybe it just doesn't win as many events as some of these players wanted, or it's not doing quite as well, or something else comes out, then it kind of drops off, right? It goes on the other side of the bell curve. And then once it's dropped down, you get to like the true believers, who are oftentimes the same people as the early adopters. And those numbers start to spike. We saw that with stuff like Cardcaptor Sakura. We saw that with stuff like Love Live Sunshine in particular, right? I think we're going to continue to see it with things like Beaufry and maybe even like Sword Art, Data Live to a certain extent. Slime's in that category now. Slime is in the true believers zone, where like the people who are on Slime are the people who are going, no, it's still good, even though it didn't do as well as, in the broad sense as some of these other sets. It's still good, and piloted by the right player, played in the right way, it can have success, and it clearly can. It went 500, which is, it's whatever, it's 500 overall. But it had a pair of tops. At least 3 of its players had good tournaments. Is Slime going to be there for a while? Or is Slime going to just eventually drop off and become, banished to the Kaguya zone where literally nobody plays it?
I thought it was interesting that for representation-wise, because it just got the reprint, right? So there was a lot more access to some of the older stuff, specifically like the Shizu combo from set 1. So I was more surprised by anything that was a lot smaller representation after a reprint. That was my big take from that. It was just the rep size was smaller.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Like, especially because Slime is so cheap right now because of that reprint as well. Like, that usually is enough to entice people. But it doesn't seem to have done so in this case. Probably just because like Hololive is just as cheap,
Oh yeah, I don't disagree that everything is cheap right now. I thought it was interesting with some of the new stuff coming out. That was a relatively recent addition.
Okay, so I think that we have talked about basically everything that's like... Oh, no, we haven't, because we haven't talked about Ruby yet. Guys, Ruby! I don't know why I'm, like, surprised. I'm not actually surprised. We've known this whole time that Ruby's actually really solid. But is it time to start thinking about Ruby as a little more established than I think we sometimes give it credit for? Because its top 8 rate and its X2 percentage are, like, right in line with things like Danmachi and Hololive and Bang Dream. Like, it's in that same kind of category, or at least it appears to be. And obviously Hololive is like, that, set, we're talking about set wide with Hololive, which, that's not exactly a fair way to look at that. But Ruby's got something. It's still got something. And like, it feels like it, kind of maybe doesn't quite get talked about to that extent enough.
Interesting to note, the list that was the most successful was the one that had 2 different standby combos in it. The Pura and then the Ruby standby at the top.
Players who played Choice with 2 different standby combos, and it worked. That thing worked. That turns heads. An 80% win percentage will turn heads no matter what the sample size is. Like, is that the way to play Ruby going forward, or is this, is this going to hold up? Because Choice Standby with just one standby combo only won 45% of its games.
No, I think it's interesting. I think that like you have like Ruby's always been the one that's kind of like the English exclusive that stands alone by itself, near the top of what's going on.
Yeah, because it's the only one that like is still good in a broader worlds level meta. Like, honestly, there are three things I think that Ruby does that are specific and unique and good. One of which is it's just massive. Like, it's actually bigger than most things. Just sitting there at level 2. So like it gets huge and is actually a problem even for stuff that gets big like Mushoku Tensei and quintuplets to actually remove when they attack. Secondly, the pure shuffleback is excellent, and that's just an effect you see basically nowhere else other than Rushia. Like a shuffleback to this extent. And thirdly, the Ruby combo is non-interactive. Like it's so easy to play around stuff when you're playing the Ruby top end because it's just like, yeah, like tap counter doesn't happen. There's no tap counter here. Like Nexel counters, like those just don't go off. So a lot of the defensive stuff that we're seeing in the contemporary meta just it doesn't happen. And especially when you've decompressed your opponent, burn 3, burn 1 is pretty good into a decompressed deck. I'm feeling slightly alone on this, guys. Am I like way off base? Is there something I'm messing up here?
No, I think you just covered it all. I think you're spot on with everything.
As we wrap this up, looking ahead to BCS, what is something that you saw at Rumble that you think is potentially really relevant going into this season that people should either consider playing or at the very least be aware of in Swiss?
I think the big one is Kanata Marine. Now, it was everywhere, all over Bro, and it's already got a top again in Texas. But it's really been a massive shift between Springfest and Bro. There was a lot of Corona Marine, and now almost all of that is gone. It didn't top at all over Bro, and that's because I think Kanata has really taken its place. So if you haven't looked up on Kanata, if you want to play a Hololive deck, I think it's the best build. I think you should do your research on it because if you're not prepared for it, the Kanata deck might not even make it to level 3 by the end. They just snowball on Kanatas, and you might never be able to defeat them. Another thing is maybe watch out for stock swap. So there's a lot of people seem to be vocal at the moment that stock swap is not that great. That's an easy way to lose to decks like Kanata Marine, Tokyo Revengers, and Mushoku if they've had a fairly clean game because they do have twin drives. I think stock swap is a thing that I'd be looking to add to your deck if you aren't already.
Yeah, I think especially, I think you really hit it on the head there. My follow-up would be just keep an eye on the new things coming out. Like
Attack on Titan.
Yeah, man, Attack on Titan.
It is being constantly attacked at the moment, that's for sure.
That is true. And there's Titans in it, so it even works out.
There is Titans.
No, I just think like if you're not aware of what Quince does, if you're not aware of some of the tools that can be added to HoloLive with the premium booster coming out,
maybe more than ever, the living deck list is so important. Like, you just don't have the same list of 50 cards week to week even. Like, as new stuff gets dropped and as new ideas and strategies are developed, like, people are changing their lists to match those things. Like, they are swapping cards in, at deadlines. And I think that that's important. Like, we need to be aware of all of the tech pieces that a deck might be running because there's a lot of stuff. So no, I completely agree with you. I think that there's a lot of stuff. Like HoloLive Premium is going to actually like give HoloLive a little shot in the arm that actually could make it even better. All right, and that's all we've got. Thank you for joining us for this very long show. We will be back on Thursday with more 5 Cards 5 Minutes. Next week, Weiss 102, followed by more 5 Cards 5 Minutes. And in 2 weeks, another Clock Talk. We'll talk about what happened in Atlanta and Taiwan and any more updates as we prepare for Chicago. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Darcy, for being here with us. It was a pleasure. You are always welcome to join us whenever you're able. You're a really good player. You definitely deserved your win, so continue to celebrate that for sure. And I'm looking forward to seeing you perform well again at the regional level.
Thank you, and I hope to be able to go to LA to go to Worlds. It's been a very long time since I've seen some of my American friends. It's been many years. So I hope to be able to do it again, and I hope I can top BCS. And also, quick shout out to my YouTube channel. You can subscribe to me there. I talk about some Weiss stuff occasionally. And thank you to my team, WCC.
Until next time, thank you so much for joining us. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and have a good one.
We'll see you then.